My husband drifted away from me to support his female best friend, but the truth I discovered ended our marriage and made him lose all. I'm 29, female, and have been married to my husband, who is also 29, male, for 1 year. I met him 2 years ago at a friend's birthday party, and we felt something click almost instantly. We got along really well, and soon enough, we were in a serious relationship. My relationship and marriage were normal, like anyone else's, with its regular ups and downs, except for maybe one thing. My husband still had a best female friend from his college days, and he was very close to her. I'll refer to her as Nina, 29, female. My husband and Nina have been friends for over 10 years, and she was even the best man at our wedding. I didn't have anything against her. Maybe I did feel a little insecure in the initial stages of my relationship, but with time, I started relaxing around Nina as well. When I asked my husband about her, he reassured me that they'd always been friends and would never be anything more than that. Nina was a little weird, in my personal opinion. I think the Gen Z kids nowadays are calling women like her pick me, so I'd say that's how she was. She never put me down, and I believe that was out of respect for my husband, but she didn't hesitate to talk crap about other women and make fun of them for just doing feminine things. She'd mock other women we knew for liking makeup, not watching sports, and not drinking beer, etc. I didn't like that side of her, but I'm not a very confrontational person, so I didn't say anything to her either. As long as my husband wasn't joining in on that, I was fine with it. Recently, Nina had a really bad breakup. She'd been dating this guy she met at work, and they'd been together for a little over 1 year. Nina was crazy about this guy. My husband had told me that she might even want to marry this boyfriend of hers. I was actually kind of relieved because he told me that most of her relationships before this were pretty short-lived, and it used to make me worry that maybe Nina had a thing for my husband. But if she was planning to marry this guy, then that probably wasn't the case. 1.5 weeks ago, though, she showed up at our house in a really bad state, and I was really alarmed because she looked totally out of sorts and was actually sobbing. Later on, after my husband and I comforted her and calmed her down, we found out that her boyfriend had just dumped her right before she was about to ask him to marry her. He'd gone through her texts a few minutes before when she was in the shower and found a dating app on her phone. He was naturally livid about that and accused her of cheating, but she insisted that the app was there just because she got bored sometimes and would treat it like a game for matches but wouldn't actually speak to anyone or initiate anything. He didn't like her explanation and left her anyway. Personally, I think her excuse was just ridiculous. If she was really that bored, then she should have downloaded some actual games on her phone instead of a dating app. I don't know anyone who does that, and I don't think her boyfriend was wrong. But my husband was consoling her and telling her that it wasn't her fault and that he'd help her get him back if that's what she wanted. My husband let her stay over that night on the couch and even watched over her because he said that he'd never seen her like this and he wanted to make sure that she was all right. He told me that I could sleep in the bedroom, but I decided to sleep on the pull-out couch with him because I felt uneasy leaving them alone in the living room. So, we all ended up sleeping in the living room, my husband and I on the pull-out couch and Nina on the other couch. The next morning, she was supposed to leave, but she stayed on because she said she felt too weak to go back home alone. My husband requested me to let her stay, so I agreed. I didn't want to, but I didn't know how to ask her to leave when my husband was trying to convince me otherwise. Like I said, I'm just a total pushover when it comes to my loved ones, and so I let her stay. For the next couple of days, it was all about Nina. My husband was attending to every need of hers and waiting on her constantly, as if she were a sick little girl and not just another 30-year-old going through a breakup. It was weird for me, and on several occasions, I wanted so badly to say something against it, but my husband kept talking about how poor Nina was going through something so bad and how her boyfriend didn't even deserve her, but they were still trying to get him back. I wasn't feeling particularly sympathetic towards the woman who had basically just taken over my home, my husband, and my life, so I wouldn't say much and would just let him talk whenever Nina wasn't around. My husband had started distancing himself from me after Nina showed up, and it just became all about her. After a while, she was all he talked about. It was always just poor Nina this and poor Nina that, and that was all he talked about. I started getting really annoyed after a while and was almost about to sit him down and talk to him about how this living situation wasn't working anymore and Nina needed to go home. A few days ago, I came back home to find my husband had come back before me. It was kind of surprising because he usually tells me when he comes back home early. Even after Nina's arrival, we'd all been going to work as usual, and the first one to come back was usually me. I unlocked the door and headed in, but the living room was empty. So, I went towards the bedroom and found the door slightly ajar. When I peeked in, I saw my husband sitting on the bed with Nina. They were talking, and Nina was fiddling with her phone while sobbing, as usual. I wanted to barge in and let them know I was back home because they clearly hadn't heard me enter, but it was too tempting to listen to what they were talking about when I was not around. So, I remained outside and decided to eavesdrop on their conversation. My husband was telling Nina that this was bound to happen at some point and that she deserved better. So, my guess was that Nina's ex had finally told her to stop contacting him or something similar. Then Nina started whining once more about how this was all so unfair and that he was being too hard on her for no reason apart from the fact that she just downloaded a dating app to mess around with. Then she said that she wished she'd never dated him in the first place, but she was just so desperate to get married at her age that she was ready to settle for anyone at this point. My husband told her that she was being ridiculous and that she deserved better, to which Nina said something that made my stomach drop. She actually started flirting with my husband and told him that she wished she'd married him instead, but now she'd missed her chance, and it was too late for them now. I expected my husband to say something to dismiss that or to tell her to stop at the very least. I didn't expect him to say what he said next. He told Nina that even he occasionally found himself wishing that he had married her instead of me and that, of late, he'd been wondering how different life would have been if that had been the case. As if that wasn't hard enough for me to hear, he even added more to that and told her that after Nina had started living with us, he'd sometimes imagined her to be his wife instead. The two of them started giggling. I was disgusted and immediately made up my mind to leave. I'd heard enough. I didn't need to hear any more. So, I went back out the door and drove to the nearest hotel. Once I was in the room, I completely broke down. I've been in the hotel since then, and I've also blocked my husband, all his friends and family, and obviously Nina too. It's been 3 days since then, and I haven't been out of the hotel room since. Yesterday, my husband texted me from a friend's phone, and I'd forgotten to block that particular friend of mine, so I unfortunately received those text messages as well. He told me that he knew I'd overheard the conversation he'd been having with Nina because when I left, I'd forgotten to shut the door behind me. He said that he didn't know how much I'd heard, but he wanted to let me know that he'd just been saying all that to make Nina feel better about herself and that he still loved me, not her. He also said that Nina had left that day itself after he told her that she couldn't stay anymore if it was making me insecure and that I needed to come back so that we could discuss this. Now, I don't know what to think of it because, on one hand, I want to go back to him because I really do love him, but I'm just so tired of being such a pushover and letting people walk all over me. I think that I'm the one who was an idiot, and that's why this even happened. If I had put my foot down and made my husband tell Nina to leave earlier, then I wouldn't be in this situation at all. So, I don't know what to think right now. I can't talk to any of my friends or family about this because I feel like I was a total fool here and let my husband treat me like a second option, and I don't feel like explaining the situation to them either because it's just so pathetic. I was an idiot, and my husband. Well, there's just no way I can justify what he did. He really had no need to say what he did to Nina. I told him today that I'm not coming back and will be filing for divorce soon. I unblocked him and texted him back on his own number. He called me as soon as I sent that text, and he sounded very upset on the phone. He just repeated everything he'd already said in his text, that he was just trying to make Nina feel better and that he didn't mean anything that he'd said. He said that he'd asked Nina to leave that day itself and even said that I could talk to Nina if I didn't believe him. I told him that it wasn't about whether I believed him or not. He just couldn't say things like that to another woman and expect me to be all right with it, and I wasn't interested in talking to Nina. Even if my husband didn't mean what he'd said, she definitely had meant it, and just like I'd always known, she'd wanted my husband all to herself all along. Even thinking about the fact that I'd let her stay with us made me sick because she and my husband had made a total fool out of me, and I'd let them. But at least I was going to leave now and wouldn't make the mistake of staying with him any longer. After that phone call, I blocked him again and decided to tell my friends and family that I was leaving him because it had been almost 1 week, and none of them knew what I'd been up to. I'd even been working remotely because I was so depressed, but I was finally feeling better, and I wanted to rip the band-aid off today itself. I'm finally feeling relieved now, and I think I made the right choice. I'd been afraid to ever believe that Nina and my husband wouldn't take advantage of my kindness and the fact that I never questioned their relationship, never tried to ruin their friendship, never stood in the way, and even tried to help Nina through her breakup. I'm not ready to be a fool anymore. This is where it ends. Anyway, I spoke to a lawyer today, a friend of my dad's, and he reassured me that he'll help me to the best of his abilities. We're going to file for divorce in a few days. I also decided that I wanted to go back home today to collect my things because I'd left in a rush and hadn't taken anything apart from my work laptop and my car with me. I bought some clothes from a nearby store, but I obviously can't live in the hotel forever and need more clothes and toiletries if I want to move out. So, I went back home today at a time when I thought my husband wouldn't be at home, a little after 1 p.m. Unfortunately, his car was parked in the driveway, and so was Nina's. Seeing that, I left. Clearly, he'd been lying to me about Nina having left, or maybe she had left that day, But once I told my husband that my decision to leave was final, she'd moved back in with him. I felt awful when I saw her car there, but I'm trying not to let these things get to me anymore because that'll just make it harder for me to keep it together. I can't afford to break down mentally when I'm already going to have to prepare for a divorce and have to rejoin work in a day or two. I've spoken to a friend of mine, and she's been kind enough to let me live at her place for a few days while I look for a new apartment or house for myself. Everyone's been really helpful, and I'm really lucky to have such wonderful and supportive friends and family because I don't think I'd be able to get through this otherwise. I haven't been able to update as often because I was really caught up with work, and I also moved into a new apartment yesterday, so I've had my plate full for a while. I filed for divorce almost 1 week ago, and my husband was served 3 days back. He was not happy about it. I know because the day before yesterday, I went back to the house so I could collect all my things once and for all. I'm not taking any of the furniture yet because the apartment I'm renting is pre-furnished, so I don't need it as much. He was furious when I showed up at the house and tried to talk to me, but I just ignored him and didn't engage in any conversation. I told him that I'd just come back to take my things, and I'd be done in an hour or so. I'd also brought along my friend to help, a friend I'd been living with previously, so that I wouldn't have to deal with him on my own. He tried to talk to me initially, making several attempts to catch my attention as I moved through the house gathering my belongings. His voice carried a desperate edge that I'd never heard before, but I refused to engage. When his efforts continued to fail and I maintained my stone-cold silence, he finally stopped trying, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I thought that perhaps he'd finally gotten the message and accepted that there was nothing left to say between us. I allowed myself to believe he'd given up. But I should have known better. Within an hour of my arrival, I heard another car pull into the driveway, and my stomach dropped when I realized who it was. Nina had also shown up, presumably summoned by my husband in a last-ditch effort to somehow fix this irreparable situation. Her presence felt like salt being poured into an already gaping wound. I could choose not to talk to them directly, I had that much control over the situation. I could refuse to respond, refuse to acknowledge their words with my own. But I couldn't physically drown them out when they were standing right there in front of me, talking at me with increasing desperation. The house wasn't large enough to escape their voices, and so, despite every fiber of my being wanting to shut them out completely, I had to listen as Nina launched into what I can only describe as the most delusional, self-centered speech I'd ever heard. She talked about how my husband had asked her to leave that day just for my sake, painting him as some kind of noble martyr who'd chosen his wife over his true feelings. And then, and this is where my blood started to boil, she admitted that even though she felt like she'd fallen in love with him, she was supposedly ready to sacrifice those feelings so that we could be together. As if she were doing me some kind of favor. As if her sacrifice was somehow heroic rather than what any decent person would do when they realized they'd been having an emotional affair with someone's husband. She kept talking, her voice taking on this wounded, trembling quality that I'm sure she thought was sympathetic. She went on about how she was going through such a really tough time in her life, playing the victim card for all it was worth. According to her twisted logic, that's why she needed me to stay with her best friend, because her own heart had already been broken twice now, first by her ex-boyfriend who'd rightfully left her, and now by my husband who'd apparently broken her heart by. What, exactly? Asking her to leave? The audacity was astounding. She claimed she didn't want to feel responsible and guilty for breaking up our marriage as well, and that's why she wanted me to stay with him. The sheer mental gymnastics required to arrive at that conclusion was baffling. Somehow, in her mind, she'd managed to position herself as the wounded party trying to do the right thing, rather than the homewrecker she actually was. I don't know how I managed not to fly off the handle when she was saying those things. Even my friend looked scandalized because of how ridiculous those two were being. It was beyond selfish of them, but I'd learned that thinking about other people and their feelings was definitely not their strong suit. I just didn't have anything to say to them anymore because I don't think anything sensible can even penetrate those thick skulls of theirs. If they can think of themselves as the victims even in situations like this, then, really, there's nothing that I can say or do to change their minds. So, anyway, I guess this was the last time that we met without lawyers and informally. I'm out of there for good. It's been almost 2 weeks since I filed for divorce, and my husband finally responded a couple of days back. My husband, surprisingly, decided not to contest it. I had mixed feelings about that because the way he was acting the last time we met actually made me think that he wanted me back, but I guess not. I'm obviously a little surprised by this, but I'm also relieved that he isn't contesting it because that would just lead to more complications. My lawyer suggested that we find proof of him being in an affair with Nina, and I honestly don't think that it'll be that hard. I heard from a friend that they spotted my husband holding hands with Nina in a cafe around 1 week back, but it didn't look very romantic. My husband looked upset, and Nina looked like she was comforting him. I didn't know what to make of that, but I did mention it to my lawyer, and he said that this information would definitely help us in the divorce. On one hand, I obviously feel really upset that my husband is spending so much of his time with Nina because that just reinforces what I already knew, that he'd only ever had eyes for her and never me. He'd not only wasted his own time but he'd also wasted my time and Nina's as well because he couldn't get his feelings in order. I don't know what to think anymore, and emotionally, I've just been numb. I've only been going to work and coming back like a robot because I just feel so empty and awful all the time. All the anger, sadness, betrayal, and pain I was feeling has been replaced by this emptiness because I just don't know what I did to deserve this. Maybe I was stupid enough to believe that my husband being so close with Nina would never cause any problems in our marriage, and I even tried to be that woman's friend. But I don't think even that warrants something like this. Yeah, I was dumb, but this is just crazy. I've been trying to put on a brave face, but I'm just exhausted and don't know how long I can keep this up. Honestly, I feel like I rushed into this whole relationship and marriage with my husband just because I didn't want to lose him because he was one of the rare people that I actually connected with. I didn't think that this would ever backfire so badly, but here we are. At this point, I don't care what happens in the divorce or the settlement. I just want to be out of this and don't want anything to do with my husband. I want this nightmarish relationship to come to an end, and I want people to never talk to me about him ever again or about Nina either. I just want to be done with this, no matter what it takes. I'd been at my wit's end on what to do or how to prove that my husband and Nina were involved in an emotional affair. I was also feeling really low knowing that, even if I did somehow manage to prove that, it would be me who would feel like crap about whatever I would find. But then, a few hours ago, I received an email from my husband where he just basically confessed that he'd slept with Nina last night because both of them were feeling really depressed. He said that they were drunk and sad and couldn't stay apart anymore on my account because I'd made it very clear that I wouldn't take him back, and we were done. He'd sent it from a new email address, and when I read it, I was broken. I genuinely didn't know what to feel, and I still don't, to a certain extent. So it had finally happened. The thing I'd been dreading, the confirmation I never wanted to receive, had arrived in the form of a simple email, and while a part of me recognized that this should bring some relief, after all, he had essentially handed me a written confession of infidelity on a silver platter, the reality of it cut far deeper than I'd anticipated. It meant that every nagging doubt I'd harbored when I first entered this relationship, every anxious thought I'd pushed away, every instinct I'd ignored in favor of trust, had been validated. All those fears I'd silenced, telling myself I was being paranoid or insecure, turned out to be legitimate warnings I should have heeded. I'd known it. Deep down in that place where we store uncomfortable truths we're not ready to face, I'd known it all along. But there's a vast difference between suspecting something in the abstract and having it confirmed in black and white. To finally accept it, to confront the reality head-on rather than dancing around it with hopeful denial, was just so incredibly, overwhelmingly difficult. The weight of that truth crashed down on me all at once, and I ended up crying for what felt like hours after reading that email. The tears wouldn't stop, even though I knew they wouldn't change anything. Eventually, though, I managed to pull myself together enough to forward the email to my lawyer, and his response was predictably professional. He seemed genuinely pleased with this development. I suppose from a legal standpoint, I should have been celebrating. This was exactly the kind of evidence we needed. However, even though everything was now sorted on the legal front and the path forward was clear, I found myself emotionally shattered in a way I hadn't experienced before. The victory felt hollow, Pyrrhic even. I just wanted someone to reassure me that I'd somehow be okay, that I'd survive this devastation and eventually find my way back to myself. So I called my dad, who has always been my rock through every challenge, big or small, and with a trembling voice, I told him what had happened. He didn't hesitate for even a moment. He was at my door within half an hour, arms laden with cake and ice cream, comfort food from my childhood. My mom came along with him too, which was just really sweet and exactly what I needed, even though I hadn't known it until I saw them standing there. I ended up crying some more when they arrived, but eventually, they managed to get me to stop crying and console me. They didn't tell me that this wasn't my fault. They didn't make me feel judged. They were just there, and honestly, that's all that I needed to feel better. I knew that I could have been a little more aware and smarter about this whole thing, and maybe I could have avoided the situation altogether, but what's done was done now, and I couldn't change the past. So, I had to just move on and focus on the future. My parents told me they'd be staying with me for a while to make sure that I was all right because they told me that I'd lost an insane amount of weight, and they couldn't just let me sit around and soak anymore. I'm grateful for that, and I hope that I feel better soon and also that my divorce will be finalized soon.